I never thought a simple Tuesday morning would be the day my entire world crumbled and rebuilt itself in the span of 15 minutes. My name is Patricia, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 8 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage with Michael, my 35-year-old husband who worked as a construction engineer. We had everything mapped out. Our joint savings account with $45,000, our beautiful 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, and plans to start a family next year. I was a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company, pulling in decent money and building what I thought was our future together. Michael and I had fallen into this comfortable routine where we'd discuss our days over dinner, plan weekend trips, and dream about the kids we'd have running around our backyard. He was charming, successful, and everyone always told us we were the perfect couple. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to believe that surface-level happiness meant we had a solid foundation. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared about 6 months ago, though I didn't recognize it as a warning sign at the time. Michael started taking more business trips to Miami. At first, it made sense. His construction company had landed a big contract for a luxury hotel development down there, but the trips became more frequent, sometimes lasting entire weeks. When he'd return, he seemed different, distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. I started noticing little things that made my stomach twist with unease. He'd get text messages at odd hours and would quickly flip his phone face down when I walked into the room. His laugh sounded forced during our conversations, like he was performing the role of a happy husband rather than actually being one. When I'd ask about his day or the progress on the Miami project, his answers became vague and rehearsed. The most telling sign was how he'd changed toward me physically and emotionally. The man who used to pull me close during movies now sat on the opposite end of the couch. He stopped initiating conversations about our future, deflecting whenever I brought up our family planning timeline. When I suggested we book a vacation together, he'd cite work commitments or financial concerns that didn't quite add up given our healthy savings account. I began to feel like I was living with a stranger wearing my husband's face. There were moments when I'd catch him staring off into space with this dreamy expression, like he was thinking about something, or someone, that made him incredibly happy. But that happiness never seemed to include me anymore. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of his big project was just affecting him temporarily. The night before everything fell apart, Michael had been unusually affectionate. He brought me flowers and suggested we order takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. I remember thinking that maybe my worries had been unfounded, that perhaps he was finally coming back to me. We watched a movie together, and for a brief moment, it felt like old times. He even mentioned something about big changes coming and how he hoped I'd understand someday. I interpreted it as him possibly getting a promotion, or us finally being able to afford that bigger house we'd talked about. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Michael had left early for what he said was a breakfast meeting with potential investors. I was in my silk pajamas, sitting at our kitchen island with my coffee and laptop, reviewing campaign metrics for a client presentation later that day. The morning sunlight was streaming through our bay window, hitting the family photos we'd hung on the adjacent wall, images of our wedding day, vacation selfies, holiday parties with friends, all evidence of what I thought was a life well lived. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message at exactly 9:47 a.m. I assumed it was Michael telling me about how his meeting went, or maybe my assistant reminding me about an appointment. I glanced at the screen casually, expecting something mundane and ordinary. Instead, I saw words that made my blood turn to ice. "I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old babe. I've already emptied our joint account, haha." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, reading it over and over again, certain that I must be misunderstanding something. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my husband of 8 years casually destroying our marriage via text message like he was canceling a dinner reservation. The casual "ha-ha" at the end felt like a slap across my face, like my devastation was amusing to him. My hands started shaking as the full weight of his words sank in. A 20-year-old. While I was 32 and feeling insecure about the tiny lines appearing around my eyes, my husband had been having an affair with someone who was barely out of their teens. someone who was closer in age to my youngest sister than to me. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined possible. But it was the part about our joint account that made my stomach drop to the floor. With trembling fingers, I immediately opened my banking app, praying that he was just being cruel and hadn't actually stolen our life savings. The page loaded slowly, each second feeling like an hour. When the balance finally appeared, I saw a devastating zero where our $45,000 used to be. He had actually done it. Michael had methodically planned this destruction, emptying our shared finances before delivering the news like a coward. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in the heat of passion. This was calculated, cold, and designed to leave me financially vulnerable while he started his new life with his child bride. I felt a strange calm wash over me as I typed my response. Good luck. 2 simple words that would later become the foundation of his downfall, though he had no way of knowing that in the moment. The immediate aftermath was surreal. I sat in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal while our coffee maker continued its cheerful gurgling in the background. The normalcy of my surroundings made the situation feel even more bizarre. Our refrigerator was still covered with takeout menus and grocery lists written in both our handwritings. The calendar on the wall still had our couple's therapy appointment scheduled for next week, something we'd planned to work on communication issues. I found myself laughing bitterly at that irony. Communication issues, indeed. My first instinct was to call someone, my sister, my best friend, my mother, anyone who could help me make sense of what had just happened. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed. Instead of breaking down or making emotional phone calls, I found myself moving into action mode. I screenshot Michael's text message, making sure to capture the timestamp and his contact information clearly. Then, I began documenting everything I could think of. Our recent bank statements, photos of our shared assets, texts from the past few months that might serve as evidence of his deception. My marketing background had taught me the importance of data collection, and apparently that skill translated well to gathering evidence of marital betrayal. The next step was investigating this mysterious 20-year-old who had somehow convinced my husband to abandon 8 years of marriage. It didn't take long to find her on social media. Her profile was public, and she'd been posting photos from Miami with alarming frequency over the past 6 months. Photos that coincided perfectly with Michael's business trips. Her name was Ashley, and she was everything I wasn't at 32. Blonde, artificially enhanced in all the right places, with the kind of carefree confidence that comes from being young and having no real responsibilities. Her Instagram was filled with bikini shots, expensive dinners, and luxury hotel rooms that I now realized my husband had been paying for with our money. What struck me most wasn't jealousy, but a profound sense of clarity. Looking at Ashley's photos, seeing the vapid captions and obvious gold digger mentality, I realized that Michael had traded our substantial partnership for something shallow and ultimately unsustainable. He'd given up a woman who had supported his career, managed our household, and planned our future for someone who was clearly only interested in what he could provide financially. As I scrolled through months of evidence of their relationship, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not heartbreak, not devastation, but actual relief. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with, and honestly, he hadn't been that man for quite some time. Ashley was welcome to whatever version of Michael she thought she was getting, because the real Michael, the one capable of this level of cruelty and deception, wasn't someone I wanted to be married to anyway. That evening, as I sat alone in our house that no longer felt like ours, I began to understand that Michael had made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed that leaving me would destroy me, that I'd be helpless without him. He probably expected desperate phone calls, begging, maybe even me showing up in Miami to fight for our marriage. What he didn't expect was that I'd spent the entire day getting organized, documenting everything, and preparing for a war he didn't even know was coming. Michael thought he'd won by striking first and taking our money, but he'd forgotten one important detail about the woman he'd married. I didn't get to where I was in my career by giving up when things got difficult. As I prepared for bed in our empty house, I smiled for the first time since receiving his text. Michael had no idea what kind of woman he'd just crossed, and by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late for him to protect himself from the consequences of his choices. The girl he'd run off with might be 20 years old, but I had something she'd never possess: the wisdom, resources, and determination of a woman who'd built a life through her own efforts and wasn't about to let anyone destroy it without a fight. The moment I decided to stop being a victim and start being a strategist came exactly 1 week after Michael's cowardly text message. I'd spent those 7 days gathering intelligence, consulting with professionals, and most importantly, discovering just how many legal violations my dear husband had committed in his rush to start his new life with Ashley. My family law attorney, Rebecca Martinez, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in high-conflict divorces. When I showed her the evidence I'd compiled, her eyes lit up with the kind of professional excitement that told me Michael was in serious trouble. "Patricia," she said, leaning back in her leather chair, "your husband just handed us the strongest divorce case I've seen this year. Abandonment, financial abuse, and marital waste. He violated at least 3 state laws when he emptied that joint account without notice." The trigger moment came on Thursday morning when I received another text from Michael. This one was different, less cocky, more demanding. "I need you to sign the house over to me so I can sell it. Ashley and I want to buy something in Miami. Stop being difficult and just cooperate." The audacity was breathtaking. He'd stolen our money, abandoned our marriage for a girl young enough to be his daughter, and now he wanted me to just hand over our most valuable asset so he could fund his midlife crisis. That text was the final straw that transformed my hurt into cold, calculated fury. I forwarded the message to Rebecca immediately, then began executing the first phase of my counterattack. Within 2 hours, I'd filed for divorce, citing abandonment and financial abuse. By the end of the day, I had a temporary restraining order that froze all our joint assets and prevented Michael from accessing or selling any marital property without court approval. The beauty of moving first in a divorce is that you get to control the narrative. While Michael was playing house in Miami, I was systematically building a legal fortress around everything he thought he could take from me. He'd made the classic mistake of assuming that his betrayal would leave me too emotionally devastated to fight back effectively. Friday afternoon brought the first sign that my strategy was working. Michael called me for the first time since his departure, and I could hear the panic in his voice even before he started yelling. "What the hell did you do, Patricia? I can't access any of our accounts." I kept my voice steady and professional. "I protected our marital assets from further theft, Michael. Isn't that what a responsible spouse would do? You can't freeze me out of my own money." "Actually, I can, and I did. You should probably get a lawyer." The conversation escalated quickly from there, with Michael hurling accusations and threats while I calmly recorded every word on my phone. His anger was revealing. He'd expected me to be the same compliant wife who'd never questioned his business trips or late-night phone calls. He had no idea how to handle a version of me that fought back. The most satisfying part was hearing the uncertainty creeping into his voice as he realized his carefully planned escape was falling apart. "Look, Patricia, maybe we can work something out. This doesn't have to get ugly." It became ugly the moment you sent me that text message, Michael. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Michael's new life in Miami begin to crumble in real time. Ashley's Instagram posts, which had previously been filled with expensive dinners and luxury shopping sprees, suddenly shifted to more modest activities. The 5-star hotel photos were replaced by pictures of a significantly less impressive apartment complex. Rebecca explained that Ashley had probably assumed Michael was wealthier than he actually was. "Gold diggers are surprisingly practical," she said with a knowing smile. "When the money stops flowing, they usually move on to the next target pretty quickly." My prediction proved accurate when Michael started calling me multiple times a day, each conversation more desperate than the last. He'd gone from demanding I cooperate to pleading for me to be reasonable. The change in his tone was remarkable. Gone was the arrogant man who'd thought he could discard me like an old piece of furniture. "Patricia, please, you have to understand. I made a mistake. Ashley, She's not who I thought she was. She's been pressuring me to buy her all these expensive things, and now that the accounts are frozen, now she's showing you who she really is, I finished for him. Funny how that works. The legal proceedings moved forward with ruthless efficiency. Michael's abandonment of our marriage, combined with his theft of our joint funds, had given me an enormous advantage in court. His lawyer, a clearly overworked public defender since he could no longer access his usual resources, tried to argue that the account belonged to both of us equally. Rebecca demolished that argument by presenting evidence of how Michael had systematically planned his departure, including proof that he'd transferred money to Ashley before officially leaving me. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Michael's text message, calling it a shocking display of callous disregard for the sanctity of marriage. But Michael's problems were just beginning. As the freeze on our assets extended, his financial situation in Miami became increasingly desperate. Ashley's social media presence told the story better than any detective could have. Her posts went from daily updates to sporadic photos, and the expensive lifestyle content disappeared entirely. The breaking point came when Michael showed up at our house unannounced, 3 weeks after his dramatic exit. I was working from home when I heard his key in the lock, followed by confusion when the locks wouldn't turn. I'd changed them the day after filing for divorce, another strategic move that Rebecca had recommended. His pounding on the door was almost frantic. "Patricia, open up! This is my house too!" I looked through the peephole and saw a man who barely resembled the confident husband who'd left me for a younger woman. Michael looked exhausted, desperate, and completely out of his depth. His designer clothes were wrinkled, and he had the wild-eyed look of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed. "You need to leave, Michael," I called through the door. "You have no legal right to be here." "I live here. You can't just lock me out of my own home." "Actually, I can. Check with your lawyer about the restraining order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of me or this property." The meltdown that followed was spectacular. Michael screamed threats, accusations, and desperate bargaining attempts while I calmly filmed everything from my window. His complete loss of composure was exactly the kind of evidence that would help me in court. What he didn't know was that Ashley had already moved on. I'd been monitoring her social media carefully, and her latest posts featured a new older man, this one actually wearing a Rolex that wasn't fake. Michael's brief reign as her sugar daddy was over, leaving him stranded in Miami with no money, no support system, and rapidly mounting legal bills. The phone calls became increasingly pathetic after that. Michael would alternate between rage and desperate pleading, sometimes within the same conversation. He'd threaten to fight me for everything, then immediately switch to begging me to just talk this through like adults. "I know I hurt you, Patricia, but you're destroying both our lives with this legal nonsense. Can't we just split everything 50-50 and move on?" "You already split everything, Michael. 0 for me, everything for you and your girlfriend. Now you get to experience what the legal system thinks about that arrangement." The most revealing conversation came when he finally admitted what I'd suspected all along. "Ashley left me," he said, his voice broken and hollow. "She said I'd misrepresented my financial situation. She's with some real estate developer now. I'm living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles." Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, but I remembered the casual cruelty of his original text message, and that feeling passed quickly. Michael had made his choices based on what he thought would make him happiest, with no consideration for the woman who'd spent 8 years building a life with him. The fact that his choices had backfired spectacularly wasn't my responsibility to fix. The final court hearing was almost anticlimactic. Michael's lawyer had clearly advised him to accept whatever settlement I was willing to offer, because fighting further would only increase his legal debt. The judge awarded me 70% of our marital assets, including full ownership of the house, both cars, and most of our investment accounts. Michael was ordered to pay $30,000 in damages for the money he'd stolen from our joint account, plus all court costs and attorney fees for both sides. The man who'd thought he was making a clean escape was now facing years of debt and financial struggle. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine happiness. Not the desperate relief of survival, but the deep satisfaction of justice served and a future full of possibilities. 6 months later, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I was married to Michael. The promotion at work that I'd been working toward for 2 years finally came through, partly because I could now dedicate my full energy to my career without the distraction of a failing marriage. The house felt like mine for the first time in years. I'd redecorated completely, erasing every trace of Michael's presence and creating a space that reflected my own tastes and priorities. The master bedroom became my home office, and I converted Michael's study into a reading nook filled with plants and natural light. Dating wasn't something I'd planned to think about so soon, but life has a way of surprising you when you're finally open to possibilities. David Chin, the brilliant family law attorney who'd worked alongside Rebecca on my case, had been remarkably supportive throughout the legal proceedings. What started as professional respect had gradually evolved into something more personal. Our first real date happened 3 months after my divorce was finalized. David took me to a small Italian restaurant where we talked for hours about everything except legal strategy. He was thoughtful, funny, and refreshingly honest about his own past relationship failures. Most importantly, he saw me as an equal partner, not someone to be managed or controlled. "You know," he said over dessert, "I've handled a lot of divorce cases, but I've never seen someone rebuild their life as completely as you have. It's impressive." "I had good motivation," I replied. "Nothing makes you more determined to succeed than having someone assume you'll fail." Meanwhile, Michael's situation continued to deteriorate. Through mutual friends, I heard that he'd moved back to our city and was living in a cramped apartment across town. The Miami dream had lasted less than 2 months before financial reality forced him to slink back home. He'd taken a lower-paying job with a different construction company, since his previous employer had been less than thrilled about his unprofessional departure. Ashley, predictably, had moved on to bigger and better things. Her Instagram now featured pictures from Europe, where she was apparently dating an actual millionaire. The photos were a stark reminder of how quickly Michael had been replaced in her life, just another stepping stone in her journey toward financial security. I ran into Michael once at a coffee shop downtown. He looked older, worn down by the consequences of his choices. When he saw me, his face cycled through multiple emotions: shame, longing, resentment, and something that might have been regret. "Patricia," he said quietly, approaching my table with obvious reluctance. "You look good, happy." "I am happy," I replied simply. There was no point in being cruel. His life was punishment enough. "I know this doesn't matter now, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. The way I left, the money, all of it. I was an idiot." "Yes, you were. But we both learned something important about ourselves in the process." He nodded sadly and started to walk away, then turned back. "Do you think... Is there any chance we could ever..." "No, Michael, there isn't. But I hope you figure out how to be happy without hurting other people." As I watched him leave, I felt a profound sense of closure. The man I'd married was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed at all. But the woman who'd emerged from the wreckage of that marriage was stronger, wiser, and more confident than I'd ever been before. That evening, David came over for dinner at my house. We cooked together, laughed about terrible movies, and planned a weekend trip to wine country. As we sat on my back deck watching the sunset, I realized that Michael had actually given me the greatest gift possible. He'd forced me to discover what I was truly capable of when I stopped accepting less than I deserved. "You know what the funny thing is?" I told David as he pulled me closer on the porch swing. "Michael thought he was destroying my life when he sent that text message. But really, he was setting me free." The text message that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the life I was meant to live. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed, even if you couldn't see it at the time. Michael had wanted to trade me in for a newer model, assuming I'd be too broken to fight back. Instead, he'd unleashed a version of myself that I'd never known existed, one that refused to accept betrayal, demanded justice, and built something beautiful from the ashes of his destruction. Looking back now, I could honestly say thank you to the man who'd tried to ruin me. because in trying to destroy my old life, he'd given me permission to create something infinitely better.